Landlords of Reddit, what is the weirdest or most disturbing tenant you have ever had? Worked for a large rental property company. A man called one of the properties and asked if they had any units available on a high floor. This was a high rise in a great location, where the upper floors had a nice view of the city, so the request wasn't unusual. The man came to view the unit, and a leasing agent took him on the tour. She opened the balcony to show him the view, and then she went back into the unit, expecting him to follow. When he didn't, she turned around and he was gone. He jumped from the balcony onto the road below. The unit was on something like the 20th floor. If I recall correctly, I left the company not too long after this happened, for totally unrelated reasons, so I don't know what happened to the agent. She'd been with the company a long time, and I know she was offered counseling, but I don't know what else happened. Frick, didn't see that coming. Poor woman. Parents had rental houses growing up. One tenant got evicted and, before leaving, poured wax down the drains and used cat litter in the vents. Luckily, they had free child labor to help clean up houses like that. Real nice older guy lived in the apartment next to mine for several years. He was quiet, and I didn't notice when he had not been around for a while. The landlord asked me to go into his apartment with her, kind of afraid he might be dead inside. He had never been late on his rent before. We went in there, expecting the worst, and all that was in the entire place was a bare mattress in the living room, with an enormous stack of both magazines and DVDs, and a toaster. My elderly landlord quipped, "How do you think he used the toaster?" My older sister and her boyfriend rented out their house when they moved out west for work. After several months of non-payment, the young adult male and female tenants were told to move out. Right before leaving, they smeared feces on the floors and walls, removed every light switch and electrical outlet cover, destroyed the bathroom, and removed the locks on the doors, and left the doors wide open. Our parents rented a floor of their two-family home to a guy who was an electrician. In return for lower rent, he did electrical improvements and minor repairs to the house. All of a sudden, our parents' electric bill nearly doubled, so they called the power company for an inspection and discovered that the tenant had illegally rewired his connection so that it was drawing most of the current for his apartment from their electric meter instead of his. They had given him a substantial break in the rent, and he abused their kindness. Dad simply said, "No good deed goes unpunished." Smart enough to do all that, not smart enough to stop and think, gee, maybe they will notice a sudden 100% increase in their electric bill. Glue huffer. I was putting veneer on cabinets with a respirator. She walked into the unit asking where it was. I thought the odor was too strong and apologized. She went right for the bucket and started taking deep breaths. My buddy and I both said "new" in what seemed to be in slow motion. It wasn't her first glue rodeo, so you can imagine how fried her brain already was. I'm gonna put glue sniffing rodeo into my vocabulary from here on. I own a two-family house, so I rent out the other unit. One of my first tenants, let's call him Richard, was a young kid just out of college. He was a nice enough guy and we became friends. I have a decent sized backyard with a grill and a pool. We spent the entire summer drinking and hanging out in the backyard. The fall comes. Richard gets it in his head that he wants to repaint his living room. He asks me if that's okay and I say sure. He says he will paint it himself if I buy the paint. I buy the paint he picked out, which is a nice neutral color. I'm kind of impressed that he had such good taste. He starts painting. About a week later I get a call from Richard in the middle of the night. I was in bed with my wife and sleeping. He says he's having problems with the paint and asked if I could come up to help. At that point I thought he was done painting. It doesn't take a week to paint a room. WTF. I begrudgingly agree to go upstairs and help. I walk up the stairs in the middle of the night. I hear music blaring from the apartment. The door to his apartment is open and I walk in. There's Richard. He's completely naked with an erect dong, a roller in hand, and dancing to Goodbye Horses. I noped the frick out and told him to put some tarp down since he was getting paint on my hardwood floors. Sounds like he got paint on his own hardwood too. My dad is a landlord and I used to help work on the houses when I was a teen. One time he evicted a tenant and we went to go clean the house out with some other workers. We opened the door and cockroaches fell onto us. Inside was the most vile scene I've ever seen. Dirty diapers strewn about, crap literally smeared on the walls, cigarette butts and soggy pizza boxes everywhere. The room where they kept a dog and never let him out had a massive pile of accumulated dog crap in the corner, pee stains on the walls, a crib with cockroaches crawling around and piles of trash everywhere that made it hard to see the floor. One of the guys ran outside and vomited. The smell was so horrible. It disturbs me to this day how a person could live like that. The worst part of that story is the diapers. It means they had a child in that filth. The first time I rented out my house, I was approached by a sweet older lady who had custody of her grandkids, along with her husband, and had bad credit due to caring for her elderly mother. Oh, and the place she was staying at had a diddler next door, so they needed out ASAP. And of course they didn't have any pets, and they happily signed a year lease with me, not requiring a security deposit. They were supposed to paint in lieu. Well, I found out they are chronic deadbeats. Their pillhead adult daughter also lives with them and the 3 grandkids, and they hoard animals. They were only there 3 months, but kept complaining about repairs and asking to deduct. The house was awful and dirty when we got it back. The grass was so bad. I got a letter from the city. There was random broken furniture buried in the grass. Concrete blocks everywhere. I had to replace the carpets due to cat pee, and I fought with fleas in my own home for 3 months due to catching them from there. I closely follow our local Facebook rental groups, and I make sure to go behind her back to contact every home she expresses an interest in. Also, I should mention, South Louisiana. You can't even go 2 weeks without your yard looking like crap if you don't mow, and we have super fleas locally, according to my vet, that can get out of control pretty fast as well. I think using my personal carpet cleaner is probably where I went wrong there. However, the area they are scamming in has become extremely scarce for rentals. When mine is available, we only leave the ad up for a few hours because we can't handle the call volume. It won't be long before they truly are homeless and will be driven out of the area, as we are also in a very landlord-friendly state. I had a female tenant who lived in a basement apartment. We regularly heard a dog barking in her unit. Funny thing though, she didn't own a dog. She had every light in the unit on, 24/7, until she called complaining about not having any power. Went in to check it and she had power. Every light bulb was burned out though. All she had in the place was a futon and Bibles. Bibles in every room, open to different pages. When we finally got her out for non-payment, of course, she hired a moving company to move her belongings. The futon and a garbage bag full of clothes. Not me, but my aunt rented her place to an old lady who never showered, never washed her clothes, and kept everything she owned in large cardboard boxes. She would open a box, use something, put it back in and tape the box shut. We talked to her sister and she told us that a poor old lady had became like that after her husband died. He ran away. That is both sad and puzzling. I own a commercial building which rents mostly to small businesses. One tenant was a consulting firm run by 2 Scandinavian girls. Every day, men, and only men, would be coming in and out of their space. Other tenants complained that some kind of weird vapor or steam would regularly escape from their unit. As I recall, it turned out they were running an unregistered sperm bank, and the vapor was coming from a big container of liquid nitrogen used to store the sperm donations. That's a twist. I was expecting a brothel. My dad rents a few houses out, and about 10 years ago he was going to collect rent from an older couple in one of his houses. Let's call her Annie. Answered the door and made my dad a cuppa. He was surprised her husband, let's call him Frank, was not sitting in his normal armchair. He was quite a big man and was always there when my dad came round. So dad asked Annie where he was and she said he's in bed. He died last Tuesday. I'm not really sure what to do. This was Saturday and dad asked where she had been sleeping. In beside Frank, she said. So dad was able to help Annie with the undertakers and had to help them get Big Frank down the narrow stairs. He got Annie sorted with a new house to rent as well. Grief can make people do very strange things. TLDR. The husband of a tenant died in the bed. The wife slept in the bed with him until my dad came to collect the rent. My parents were landlords for a little while and definitely struck out a few times. New England house split into 3 units. My parents were living in one and had a good view of the driveway and could vaguely monitor the tenants. So this one guy was middle-aged single white guy. Seemed a little neurotic but nice enough. He was bothered by a few minor dents and asked my parents if he could repair them. Small holes in sheetrock etc. Like when the doorknob slams into it. He did a good job and my parents were happy. He disappeared out of nowhere for a while and was late on rent. One day my dad is home alone and the guy knocks on the screen door. Dad answers and can immediately tell something is off with him. Guy proceeds to rant and rave to my father about how the people in the sky are after him and he needs to leave town now. Graciously invites me father to join him. All the while he's pausing between words to make bzzzt noises like a radio or something. I don't know if he paid his last month's rent but they were okay with him leaving. Next story is just depressing. They had a young graduate student living by herself. Really nice girl. Quiet. Perfect tenant. One day my parents come home to cop cars all over the driveway. Apparently her ex-boyfriend had broken in and had her tied up and was violating and torturing her for like 3 days. They caught the guy and threw him in jail. Girl moved out west to stay with her family for a while. Wow, the second story is just terrible. My last landlord had in our agreement a mold clause. Basically he explained that he rented a unit to a guy and he lined the walls of the apartment with what I can assume was plastic wrap and got the humidity in the house so high and was growing mold and mushrooms on the walls of the place. So when the guy eventually was evicted they had to gut the entire unit. Also, my sister's neighbors turned their place into a RIM lab. It got busted. Mayo, did he just wake up one day like, boy have I got a cool idea. I had a pair of early version millennial monster sisters renting from me back in the early 2000s. To add to this never-ending joy was an unapologetic parasitic lawyer father. Regardless of how much I tried to explain to him that his daughters were the issue, he could not grasp the idea that his little princesses were actually foul-mouthed blow-huffing Anywho, these girls complained about anything and everything including, and I'm not kidding, that the tap water didn't get cold enough and therefore they wanted a water cooling apparatus installed directly into the plumbing. Well, upon the second to last day of their lease, they threw a bash. A gala that included human feces painted on the walls and mashed down into every drain in the place. The revelation of 2 dead, murdered hamsters. Used tampons and tea blood baked on the lighting fixtures and even the remnants of a makeshift campfire on the wooden balcony planks of the 3rd floor. No less. Total damages in excess of $45,000. Needless to say, the photos I took to sue the crap out of them were downright epic. The father's defense in court, believe it or not, was that they shouldn't be held responsible for the damage because even though they admitted to throwing the party, they said they left in the middle of it and didn't even return until the lease was up. My uncle rented his house when he went to Nepal to get married. My parents and I took the responsibility of collecting tent. These guys were awful, always late rent. When we finally got them evicted, they destroyed the house in a blind rage. Cat litter in the vents, holes in doors and walls, smashed the oven door, threw the microwave through a closed glass door. My mom was so scared to collect rent by herself, she made me go with her as I am a larger fellow. 1. I would rent out individual rooms in a big house of mine. Everybody would share a bathroom. One guy was in his 60s and was a heavy drinker and smoker. He used to not want to walk the 20 steps to the washroom, so he put a bucket in his room and would pee in it, then dump it in the toilet after it was full. I lived in the room across from him. One night I wake up to the sound of him banging on the attic suite's door. He's yelling, "Rob, quit ringing those bells. This is the last time I'm gonna tell you." There were definitely no bells ringing and the guy in the attic was a quiet guy that lived with his girlfriend. 2. 40-year-old heavy-set lady living in my basement was totally normal for 5 years. Then someone at her work must have told her she smelled like fish, so she immediately thought it was related to the basement suite. She would come up and tell me the water in the showers and sinks smelled like fish. I went down and checked. It was completely normal. It's the same water in my house and I've lived there forever. She kept harassing me, so I got a plumber to come in and run some checks. Water was fine. She then gave her notice and moved out. It was pretty bizarre. 3. Bought a 10-acre farm with a very small dilapidated house. Like 250 SQFT with a bathroom you could barely fit in. I was just gonna use it as a workshop for tools. But I'm out working on the fence at the front of the property and a guy in his 40s walking down the street asks me if I need a hand. I say sure and he helps me run the barbed wire along the property line. We start talking about the house and he said he just broke up with his wife and he's having tough times. We come to an agreement to rent the house out to him. He moved in the next day and he's been living there for 25 plus years. Same house, no renovations. I haven't even raised the rent since the day I talked to him. 4. Another 5-acre farm. Rented it out to a guy who was early 30s and had something like 8 kids with multiple women. Only a couple lived with him. I could tell he enjoyed getting out on the farm and away from his family lol. He would have crazy ideas and call me, like, do you mind if I turn the front acre into a pig farm? I was like, sure. So I go out there and there's the biggest pigs I've ever seen in my life. Like 500-pound pigs with their bellies dragging on the ground because they're so fat. Then a year later he got rid of the pigs and bought some llamas. Started growing a bunch of crops. He even planted a marijuana plant and showed me. I told him that if anybody asks, I didn't approve of it. 5. I rent a garage to a childhood friend who is a little different. He won't pay his rent for a while, then he will show up and put a bunch of $20 bills through my mail slot with my name written on them. This is a great post, and you sound like a pretty great person. Not a landlord but was an resident advisor for dorms in college. We didn't necessarily evict but we definitely saw some crap when we did the final inspections of rooms after the academic year was over. In any case, one year there was this girl who had a single room. Most rooms were 2 to her room, and she was super quiet. I'd say hi to her in the hallways and stuff but mostly she kept to herself. When the year was up, she signed up for a room checkout inspection but when I went in, she was already gone. That's not that unusual. Sometimes things happen, but usually students will let their RA know if they won't physically be there for the inspection. I did my usual check of stuff. Okay, the fridge is cleaned out, nothing in the drawers, etc. And everything was pretty normal. Then I opened her closet door. There was an entire freaking self-portrait mural covering her entire closet wall, painted in her own blood. There was a lot of weird crap I saw as an RA, but that was probably the weirdest. I never got something of that caliber, but my old supervisor told me about how a guy, who was pretty big into hunting, moved out and left a dead deer in trash bags under his bed. Our tenant burned down our house. The husband would abuse his wife by throwing gasoline, on his wife's arm and then setting it on fire. One day he got drunk, doused his wife's arm with petrol and the carpets and the nearby curtain, and burnt about 80% of the house. Holy crap, you win the worst tenant award. Had a renter who started doing he got obsessed with Chuck Norris and fake karate stuff. He had 2 little dogs he started training to kill. Only the dogs were tiny and couldn't do much. He got really demanding and also did not pay rent for 3 months. I finally told him he had to leave. He got very angry and called the city. The city told me to evict him, so I did. He destroyed the place and at age 40 plus his parents came to pick him and his nunchucks and killer dogs up. First off, men are crappy tenants. I'm sorry but I love the mental image of a 40-year-old training 2 chihuahuas to kill. There was this one guy who had a small family as a downstairs neighbor who were constantly complaining about him making excessive noise. Many noise complaints were filed, and the police were called multiple times. Neither we nor the police actually heard him making noise though, and he kept pleading that he always kept it quiet, and that the noise wasn't him. The weeks went by, and they kept arguing, taking up most of our time with complaints and attempts to negotiate an agreement so they would stop arguing. We later got a phone call from the man's downstairs neighbor. They were hysterical and told us to come over immediately. When we arrived, we found that he had sawed a hole in his floor and taken a giant crap down to the neighbor's living room. We later got a phone call from the man's downstairs neighbor. They were hysterical and told us to come over immediately. When we arrived, we found that he had sawed a hole in his floor and taken a giant crap down to the neighbor's living room. Now that's what I call commitment. Upstairs carpet ruined with fertilizer because they grew weed in there. Wallpaper ruined by pouring ashes from the stove behind the bed. Downstairs wooden floor ruined and needed to be sanded. Window smashed. One door had a hole in it made with an axe. Rent unpaid and loud parties in the yard. Needless to say, we went to court. One truck driver's family on the other hand managed to turn white bathroom sink and tiles almost black. An accomplishment in itself. not to mention not paying the rent. Multiple tenants over the years. From the past 15 years I can count exactly one who paid rent on time and kept the place in good condition. 1. I would sell the dang place tomorrow and quit being a landlord. But I'm not the only owner, so it's not exactly up to me. My friend works in real estate. Neighbors complain of foul smell coming from one of the apartments her company manages. The tenant is a man in his 30s. Nice and proper. Nothing weird about him, but the complaints keep coming and they are left with no choice but to take action. When they finally get in, the place is deserted but there is crap everywhere. Like piles of feces in the bathtub, in corners of the room. The guy just shat everywhere and apparently enjoyed collecting it or something. It was really bad, and it traumatized all the people involved. The feces had been sitting there for a while too. They had a company clean up the mess and couldn't find the guy if I remember correctly. Weird story. A baby's daddy was staying with one of my Section 8 tenants. One time he got high on crack and was dancing naked outside in the street in the middle of the night. The police came, tasered him and took him to the emergency room. He walked back home the next day in his hospital gown. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.